The fight against ISIS continues as military officials around the world struggle to unite behind a strategy to combat extremist terrorists. But as Scott Pelley found out in an interview with King Abdullah of Jordan, that is no simple task.
Abdullah became king in 1999 on the death of his father, who ruled 47 years. We met the 54-year-old at his palace in Amman. He knows ISIS by its Arabic acronym, DASH. But whatever you call it, he says the West doesn't realize it's in a third world war.
I think this is the challenge that we've had over the past several years, where people look at, is it Iraq this year or Syria next year? Well, what about Libya? What about Boko Haram or Shabab in Africa? We have to look at it from a global perspective.
All of these things need to be attacked at the same time. You can't concentrate on Syria one year and then deal with Boko Haram in another.
A prime example is, as you see certain military successes in Syria and Iraq against Daesh, the leadership, they're telling their fighters either don't come to Syria or Iraq, or moving their command structure to Libya. And so are we going to wait to get our act together to concentrate on Libya? And then, do we wait a year or two to start helping the Africans deal with Boko Haram or Shabab? So we've got to get ahead of the curve because they're reacting much quicker than we are.
The American strategy in Syria and Iraq, as you know, is to use U.S. air power and to train forces on the ground to fight the battle. That has not worked. How do you move forward from here?
I think the problem with the West is they see a border between Syria and Iraq. Daesh does not. And this has been a frustration, I think, for a few of us in this area with our Western coalition partners for several years. The lawyers get into the act and say, but there's an international border. And we say, for God's sake, ISIS doesn't work that way. So if you're looking at it and want to play the game by your rules, knowing that the enemy doesn't, we're not going to win this.
Jordan says it has flown more than 1,000 missions against ISIS in Syria in coordination with the U.S. Last year, pilot Muath Kasasbeh was captured. ISIS put him in a cage and made a video as they burned him alive. At the time, Abdullah had 2 terrorists in jail.
Within hours of that video, you hanged 2 convicted terrorists here in Jordan. What does that tell us about you?
I think they had to understand that there was no messing around with Jordan. And a lot of those that were involved in killing Muath in that video, and those that were responsible for detaining him and processing him through his captivity, have been taken down since.
He's taking down each and every one in the video.
You're going to hunt them down?
They have been hunted down, quite a lot of them, and those that are still involved, if it takes us another 50 years, we'll get them.
Those are the rules of his neighborhood.
Joining me now is Michael O'Hanlon. He's a senior fellow from the Brookings Institute, and Margaret Brennan, our foreign affairs correspondent. Good to have you both.
Thanks.
So let me get to you first, Michael. How vital is Jordan's role to help fighting ISIS and to stabilizing the region?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, as you know, they are, I think, the number 3 recipient of refugees from Syria. And so handling the humanitarian dimension of this, they're crucial. And of course, they share the southern border with Syria, their northern border, Syria's southern border. So for people who are being driven from areas near that kind of location inside of Syria, they're sometimes the only hope. In strategic terms, they are probably our second best ally operationally on the ground in the Middle East after Israel. At least I would put them there. And that means special forces cooperation, trying to get arms to certain insurgent groups, especially those that might be operating in the south. There are some insurgent groups that are relatively smaller, but in the southwest of the country along that border. And Jordan's role is crucial, both for facilitating our access and for working with us with those groups. So it's a hugely important country.
Margaret, are they able to do enough, though, to help fix the situation in the Middle East? I mean, does the United States already, as you heard Michael say, they are considered one of our top allies in the region. But given their size, given the demographics, are they able to do enough to help?
Well, they're strategically important to the U.S. if our goal is stability in the Middle East and protection of Israel. They have a peace treaty with Israel. They have tremendous, as Michael was saying, capabilities when it comes to their intelligence services. The U.S. works very closely with them on helping to try to keep the Middle East in the Middle East. The problem is that rarely happens. When you have concerns about extremism and terrorism, the U.S. is always a target. So the push on part of the U.S. is to try to keep regional containment, right? And so if they are a bulwark of stability, they're hugely important. In terms of ending the conflict that's right on their doorstep and in many ways threatening to overpower the control that King Abdullah has over his country with refugee influx, they can't end that war. And in fact, what they would say is while they want the war in Syria to end, they are not going to directly confront Bashar al-Assad. They want a major superpower to do that. The United States is that. And the United States right now is at this decision point, right, in many ways when it comes to America's role in the world on the foreign policy front. Does America want to lead the world, or does America want to simply lead by example and not through actual involvement in conflict?
Michael, I want to ask you then, how difficult is it for a country like Jordan, which has through the years absorbed many refugees from the Palestinian territories, to now accept a further influx of refugees from Syria?
You know, I'm not sure the Palestinian part is all that huge of a burden anymore because it's essentially now part of Jordan. The Palestinian refugee population in many ways is essentially Jordanian. That does create some sectarian issues inside of Jordan, or some ethnic or nationalistic issues, if you will. But I wouldn't necessarily say that that is of the same character anymore as the roughly 600,000 to 700,000 refugees from Syria. That's about 10% of Jordan's population. I mean, that's unbelievable. Imagine that in our country. 30 million refugees coming into the United States. It's literally 10% of their population that has come in from Syria now in the last 5 years.
As Michael said, we're not just talking about refugees in camps. You're talking about a massive influx of people competing for jobs, often at a lower off-the-books wage. That is going to cause a problem in a country that already has fairly high unemployment, which when you have a lot of angry, jobless people, that creates a problem for any government anywhere in the world. So when it comes to Jordan itself, I mean, King Abdullah was already in the wake of the Arab Spring, which, remember, you saw the change of government in Egypt, you saw the beginning of the conflict in Syria. Around that time was already concerned within his own kingdom about threats from other parties like the Muslim Brotherhood, those who have more of an Islamic, or Islamist, I should say, point of view. He was already concerned about controlling things. Now he's got this massive influx of people on top of, remember, Jordan has also absorbed Iraqi refugees from the last Iraq war. They have, as Michael said, absorbed the Palestinian population to a tremendous amount. But Jordan, while it keeps getting flooded, doesn't have the economic ability. They don't have oil. In fact, most of their strength comes from the allies and alliances that they have, and trade with Israel as well is key. It's hugely important there. So keeping King Abdullah strong, in many ways, the U.S. views as sort of a wall to protect U.S. interests in the region. And so while you rightly say he's a monarch, constitutional monarch,
right.
He doesn't necessarily get elected every year and people support him hugely, but he is making the right noises when he comes to Washington and asks for some economic aid to help these refugees.
Margaret Brennan, Michael O'Hanlon, thank you both very much. We appreciate it.